Hi, everyone. How are y'all doing? Come on, this is the arts track. Look alive. My name is Frances Pollock, and I am the director of the Cultural Innovation Lab here at Yale. And I'm so excited to welcome you to the 2026 Yale Innovation Summit. I wanted to take just a second because this is the first time anyone has allowed me to have a microphone. And so I wanted to officially welcome you to the summit, but I also wanted to introduce you to this panel and why it's so important to what Cultural Innovation Lab does here at Yale. So my good friend Michael is somebody I have talked to about my frustration with the scholarship in arts and humanities for many, many years at this point. And my frustration is actually that I think that a lot of the research that we do in arts and humanities is profoundly important, but I don't think it's actually being effectively translated to people who could use it outside of the university a lot of times. And so that was the frustration that I kept piling onto Michael. And when this opportunity came to build a laboratory where we could try whatever this thing called cultural innovation is, I asked Michael to help me reckon with that question about how do you take things that are inside of the university that have historically been funded in a way that makes it hard to get them outside of the university. How do we reckon with that question? So Michael became one of my entrepreneurs in residence, which is a very strange thing for a scholar in musicology. But these are titles. What'd you say?
Also because I'm not in residence.
Yeah, right. What is in residence? That's a question. So Michael joined me on this crazy quest. This is the first year that we're trying this. Idea of scholars in the arts and humanities being entrepreneurs in residence. And so we would love your feedback about how this conversation lands. You are the public we are trying to reach in many ways. And some of you are also our people in scholarship. But we want to talk to you. We want to be in dialogue with you. And we want to know how this conversation lands with you and what questions you're left with. Because that's all in the process of collecting data and making this work more effective. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to my good friend, Michael.
Should I use this or? Yeah, okay. Thanks so much, everyone, for being here. I think it shows how we care about the role of universities, the role of humanities scholars, of artists, of people who want to envision, study, write about a world where we can be more fully ourselves, more fully human. So thanks to being here amidst an innovation summit that can also feel like it's very tech heavy or finance heavy or environmental. I mean, environmentalism is a good thing, but not that those other things are not good either, but for valuing the arts and humanities amidst all of these dialogues. So the topic of conversation now is from academy to public, and how can we democratize humanities scholarship to engage with people, with audiences that might not be, that are not just in the classroom, that might be ones that are under attack, that might be ones that are curious about deeper research in how that can influence how we see the world and how we envision justice and the future. So I've assembled a really wonderful group of panelists. I'll share their bios and then after that, we'll engage on 3 topics. Ones that are relevant, the ones that we collectively decided together on trust and truth and those questions with the university. Some of you might have read or heard about a Yale report on trust in higher education. We'll also go into a topic about how content and ideas are produced and thought about in higher education and how those can translate into products or processes or systems change, and then some hopes for what are opportunities that excite us in these intersections between the academy and the public. We'll have time for questions and feedback, suggestions from you all, and then we'll close out with some concluding thoughts from the panelists. But again, thank you for you to be here, and thank you for the panelists to be here. So to start off, I'm happy to introduce Charlotte Canning, who is the Frank Irwin Jr. Centennial Professor in Drama and Distinguished Service Professor at the University of Texas at Austin. Her books include On the Performance Front, U.S. Theater and Internationalism, which was the winner of the Joe Calloway Prize, The Most American Thing in America, Circuit Chautauqua as Performance, a book that received the Barnard Hewitt Award for Outstanding Research in Theater History, and Feminist Theaters in the USA, Staging Women's Experience. And these are just 3 of numerous books that Charlotte has written. Alexandria Carrico is Assistant Professor of Music History at the University of South Carolina. Her research interests include music and disability studies, traditional Irish music, and gender and sexuality. She teaches undergraduate and graduate courses on these topics and is the co-author of Disability and Accessibility in the Music Classroom. Dr. David Sterling Brown is a tenured associate professor of English at Trinity College in Hartford, Connecticut. He is the author of the groundbreaking monograph, Shakespeare's White Others, and the forthcoming Shakespeare Under the Hood, both with Cambridge University Press, with Shakespeare's White Others available as an audiobook narrated by Brown. Additionally, he is a 2021 ACLS Mellon Foundation Scholar and Society Fellowship Awardee, and a member of the curatorial team for the Racial Imaginary Institute, founded by Claudia Rankin. And then Matthew Croasmun is Senior Lecturer of Divinity and Humanities and the Director of the Life Worth Living program at the Yale Center for Faith and Culture at Yale Divinity School. He is an ordained vineyard pastor, having helped plant the Elm City Vineyard Church, a dynamic, diverse urban church where he served as lead pastor for 6 years. He is the author of The Emergence of Sin and co-author of several books. You can check out all of their websites for more information. And then my name is Michael Wee. I am Associate Professor of Musicology at the University of Colorado Boulder and the Director of the American Music Research Center. I am the author of several books as well, 2 of which are coming out in the next year. One is on music and Washington, D.C. That's co-edited, co-authored with several folks, coming out October, Harvard University Press. And then my second book is the first and only time the U.S. government has engaged in affirmative action for the arts, and that's called Endowing Equity, coming out early next year, 2027. Thank you. So please join me in welcoming our panel, and then I will ask them a question to get us going. But all right, a quick blitz around the folks. What is one thing that you find challenging and one thing that you find as an opportunity in this moment of academy and public from your own personal perspectives? Shall I ask Matt to start us off?
Sure. Thanks, Michael. I think I'll give it two that I think are connected. So one challenge we're all thinking quite a lot about these days, of course, is artificial intelligence, and thinking in many ways that sort of, I think, extends a sort of a way of prizing a sort of instrumental reasoning, a certain way of thinking about intelligence. The kind of artificial intelligence that we create is modeled off of certain modes of understanding what intelligence is that would be valuable, and I think it's a pretty limited instrumental reasoning kind of sense of intelligence. The opportunity is, I take it that as AI and other cultural forces make answers cheap or even free and plentiful, good questions actually become where all of the value is. And I see that as that's something that in the humanities and the university, I hope that's one of the things we're really good at, actually, is formulating really, I think, more helpful questions. So that makes me think, oh, that's a real place of opportunity for contribution.
I will add to that, I think combating misinformation and disinformation is also a challenge that we're facing right now. And I think in a lot of ways it is linked to the AI matter. I feel like we live in a world right now where there is a devaluation of critical thinking as well as just valuing true, pure intellect. And so the opportunity there, I think, arises for me, and as far as this panel is concerned, is to do the work to break down silos between the academy and the general public. And I think with the opportunities that we get from AI, like, again, if we figure out creative ways to use AI to help with that, I think we can combat this issue.
As Michael said, I specialize in music and disability studies. And so I come to that through the lens of music, but a lot of what I do is very interdisciplinary. So I have the opportunity to work with folks in the sciences, humanities, and the community and nonprofit space. And one of the challenges is that the work that I do looks at how power systems are institutionalized and how they grant access to some people and exclude other people. A big challenge is that the folks that I work with and the communities that I'm a part of are often seen as the takers or the cost centers of society. But one of the challenges that I'm ready to meet, or the advantages in the work that people are doing, are counteracting that through counter narratives. And counter storytelling is something that critical race theory study scholars bring to us that allow us to tell the stories and the experiences of folks that are often not heard. And what that does, I think, is it expands our understandings of what the human experience is and what it can be. And I think that is very powerful in terms of shifting conversations of what is cost to what is value, who is valuable, and how are we going to reiterate or remake society to reflect those values.
I feel like all I need to say is yes. I guess I feel I have sort of two answers. One, I think, follows very closely to what Alex said, in that it is very much about the stories we tell and who we tell them to. I'm in theater, so I think about audiences a lot. But I also think I'm living in one of the places where it's all burning down. So I spend a lot of my time thinking about, oh, how can I do my part to save higher education in the United States? It's really nice to be here, where there's maybe less of a sense of urgency. But I spend most of my time thinking about how I can use my scholarly training as a historian, as a member of the arts community, well, and a lot of committees too, frankly, but to do my part to try to push back on what's happening, to try to save some of the institutions that are actually worth saving, even though they desperately also need to change.
Thank you. Sometimes as historians or humanities scholars, it can be difficult, risky, dangerous to engage with the present moment, even if we feel it very, very powerfully and it impacts our lives very strongly. Last year, we had a conversation about the future of the arts in uncertain times. That was after there had been a new administration that was elected into office. We're now a year into that. We have witnessed other challenges, attacks against the humanities, questioning its role, whether it is something that should be trusted, whether it's something that should be taught, and then engaging with these questions about cost, whether the humanities are constantly in need of proving themselves and their value when the return on investment or when the profit calculation, all of those things point in quantitative measures that may not be, that are probably not, that shouldn't be applied to the humanities. So I'd love to initiate an initial topic about these attacks on trust, on truth, on costs, and hear from your perspectives. How have you been thinking about this, and how might others think about this?
Okay. I can take the cue. Last fall was probably the worst, and I'm saying this as a historian, the worst fall for higher education in Texas ever. It was, I won't go through all the things, but literally in the month of September, in the space of 1 month, professors were fired, administrators removed from their posts for teaching what the other side calls gender ideology. And some of you may be on that side, that's fine, I'm willing to fight it out with you later, but for now let's just, about trans folks in the classroom. Faculty were fired for presentations they had given at conferences in other states. That was Texas State University. And students were expelled for counter-protesting to the Charlie Kirk memorials in the state. It won't surprise anyone here, I don't think, that all those students were students of color who were expelled from their institutions. So I started thinking, so what are the words that these folks keep using in their ideological approach to do this? And I came up with indoctrination, trust, and expertise were, for me, the three pivot points that they kept coming back to over and over again. I wrote a piece on indoctrination for the Dallas Morning News that came out last fall, where I demonstrated by using actual evidence that this was not happening. And then I had recently a piece that was in Inside Higher Ed about trust. I had written it a while ago, then the Yale report came out, and I talked to the editor at Inside Higher Ed, and we agreed that I would withdraw it and revise it in light of the Yale report and resubmit it. And they published it almost immediately. And I had a lot of problems with the Yale report and talked about them there, and then I was invited to be on point to give my side of the story. And it was an interesting experience. And just also full disclosure, I had a lovely breakfast this morning with the author of the Yale report. And we had a fantastic conversation about what's facing higher ed and the different things we're asked to do. I'm happy to talk, probably not during this. I don't want to swamp this event with those details, but to anyone after, if you want to talk about that and my position on all that. But what it brought me back to was, first of all, just a huge gratitude for my training as an arts and humanities scholar. I think that's what's allowing me to take on this moment. And as I said over and over again, well, pretty much to anyone who listen, which excludes my family at this point, the reason Trump got elected is he told the right story at the right time. So what stories should we be telling in this moment that could help people expand their understanding of our situation, and not tell them what to think or tell them what the answer is, but help them frame the questions from their experiences, from their points of view, that will allow them to then ask the questions they need to ask. So I'm a teacher, so I'm not, despite what the far right has said, I'm not in the business of indoctrination. I'm in the business of supporting you as you develop your own critical consciousness. I'm in the business of helping you formulate the questions that matter to you. So I have decided on, it took me a long time to design this, but I have designed a project for myself where, in addition to national outlets, I am trying to place eventually an op-ed in every major newspaper in the state of Texas as a way to jump over the gatekeepers of the regents and the legislature and put my work right in front of the people of the state of Texas, believing very, very, very much in the mandate of a public institution, right, which is to serve the taxpayers of the state that's paying my salary. Although donors, anyway, that's a lot. But so that's sort of my goal is, or it's not really a goal, that's my project, is to try to put some of the stuff I know out beyond the gatekeepers to folks who may find it helpful. Because ultimately, I do think it's about stories in a very sophisticated way, but about trying to help folks have their own moment where they go, wait a second. Like my favorite thing, this is the last thing I'll say. This is starting to be a lecture. It's very bad. 50 minutes. I can do it. I can talk for 50 minutes straight. But seriously, the best moment for me as a teacher is when some student says with real indignation, why didn't I know that? Why didn't anyone teach that? Why weren't we told that? So if I can do that in some way outside the walls of the university, that for me would be an extraordinary moment, an extraordinary achievement.
I think I'll jump in here. I get that question in my classroom. So I teach Shakespeare and critical race studies, and students come from middle school, high school with their ideas of what Shakespeare is and what we can do with Shakespeare. And I have to actually get them to unlearn a lot of things that they're taught. Or not taught in terms of being correct. And I think when we're talking about stories, for instance, that's what Shakespeare does. He tells a lot of really great, interesting, complex stories. And you talked about Trump, and you talked about just this world that we're living in right now. I wrote a piece for this national news outlet, The Conversation, where I'm comparing Trump, for instance, to Shakespeare's Richard III, which is a history play that Shakespeare has where we're watching this authoritarian dictator-type monarch just be ruthless in his quest for power and manipulation and, getting people to do what he wants because he wants to hold on to power. And a lot of this, in terms of the play, in terms of what I do as a Shakespeare and critical race studies scholar, it really does, for me, come back to race because as the motto goes for Claudia Rankine's The Racial Imaginary Institute, no sphere of life is untouched by race. So whether we're thinking about environmental studies or gender or sexuality, politics, it all matters in this conversation, and I think that's why literacy is so important, and we're seeing a lot of folks who are not really investing in championing literacy because if we keep people ignorant, then we keep them under control.
I'll just jump in here real quick. I love what you both said, Charlotte and David, and I'm thinking about the power of the arts and humanities to explore these stories, to kind of question some of the narratives that we've been handed. And I think the accusation of indoctrination is one that I get a lot. Not personally, but I hear it a lot, especially being in a red state. And I am at a public institution. And I think about my role as an educator, which for me, in so many ways, is to hold space in the classroom for people to explore ideas and to go through the process of interrogating what they know and what they're learning. I had a really incredible experience this past fall teaching a gender and sexuality seminar, and I had a lot of students in there from around the world and also the United States, all different kinds of identities. And there was one class where we were exploring the poetry and the work of Joy Harjo, who is a celebrated Native American poet and musician, and we were listening to her recite one of her poems. And I had a student from Iran who was asking why every representation that he has ever heard of Native peoples is always so sad and tragic. And kind of a question of, can we move past those things? And he started to relate it to some of the poetry and traditions in his country. And just kind of left some space. And the students dialogued about this. There was so much incredible peer teaching that happened and saying, well, this is some of the history of our country. And he could share, well, this is some of the history of our country. And are there other poems? Are there other narratives where we can explore these experiences of joy through tragedy and pain and trauma? And the answer is yes. And it took a whole class until the next class for us to come through that process. But we came out the other side of it as a community, and it was incredible to see that. I think when we have these moments of discomfort where different experiences and different ideologies come together, what happens when we have the skills to leave space for to hear other people's kind of experiences and opinions. And I thought about you having that very productive dialogue with the editor of the, or the generator of the Yale report, and how this can be a really productive space, even when we are experiencing discomfort.
Can I ask a follow-up question? One, I would say I would love to be a student in any of your classes. In what ways are students your public, and the way how is it that you approach teaching as part of your profession? And in what ways is the public your public, and how would you engage with that broader public when they're not in your classroom? How do you think about distinguishing or the overlaps of those realms as a humanities scholar?
Yeah, this is a real challenge. So in Life Worth Living, we're trying to put students in a classroom, very much like the spaces you're talking about, in which students can sit with claims to different kinds of truths than sort of scientific truths, right? Claims of what is just, what is good, what is right, what is true, and sit with multiple conflicting claims and try to do that work of discernment and that storytelling to figure that out. And all of that is so dialogical, and more than dialogical, right? It's like a multivalent conversation. And the truth that's discovered there is more like it like sits in the middle of the table than like it's like appropriate, right? So even these models in the Yale report of like the production, dissemination, and preservation of knowledge. This is all university is. We're a knowledge factory. I don't recognize that knowledge. I think the humanities is producing a different kind of knowledge, a different kind, and it's by nature shared rather than produced and disseminated. And I think that for me, that has produced like a real challenge in trying to figure out in broader culture, how do we try to take that course and then publish a book. And the book it's a monologue. I mean, it's co-authored, and we're trying to bring multiple. Anyway, so it was like, how do we put a seminar in a book? And there's necessarily something really important is lost along the way, right? But we tried to in our own way, right? And it's sort of like we invite the reader. Imagine you're sitting around a table with Confucius and Mary Wollstonecraft and James Baldwin and your neighbor and whoever else, right? Like that's I think that's what we're trying to do in this book. And every chapter ends, it was on a self-help imprint, right? So it's actually kind of a helpful form, right? Every chapter ends with it's your turn, and there are questions for reflection, and ideally dialogue with people that you trust, that you're in this sort of conversation with. So I think at the end of the day, we sort of decided the seminar. The course couldn't become a book, but the book could be an artifact that could then maybe it's like a seed, sort of like reproduce something like the living thing, like in another context, and invite people in those sorts of ways. So it's made me think very differently about the kinds of artifacts that we produce. And I'm a compulsive fourth wall breaker, so that's kind of what we did in the book, is just say like, well, this isn't going to work. But here's the closest you could do, right? Here are ways. Maybe what you'll do is you'll produce something much better than what happens in our classroom. But in any case, the artifact has to be an invitation into sort of a convening of community conversation.
It probably won't come to any surprise to anyone here, but I love teaching. And I love those moments the best where I sit back and they take it on, right? Like I don't have to do much. Yeah. Also because I'm very lazy. So that's the best day. It's like, I didn't do any work today. That up is a good day. But I'm also very fortunate because I teach at the University of Texas at Austin, where our students are super smart. They're super hungry. We have a lot of first-gen students who feel very honored to be admitted to the University of Texas and matriculating there, and are really hungry. We also have a lot of conservative students. Fortunately, most of them are good faith students, right? So they are open and they want to listen and hear stuff. There is a very small group of students who are not in good faith, but I fortunately have not had much interaction with them. And I think that having to sit in a room where I can't depend on us sharing a kind of political worldview is the best thing that ever happened to my teaching, because it's made me much more precise. It's made me much more specific. It's made me bring much more evidence and research into the classroom. So I had this spring, I taught a course called Performing U.S. Origin Stories. And we look at how the U.S.'s origin stories have been performed on stage as a way to get at how they circulate culturally and nationally. There's 4 units, immigration. I only hit the most uncontroversial topics. Immigration, slavery, indigeneity, and because we're in Texas, we start with a unit on Texas. And I've never taught it where we aren't talking about current events, especially lately. I had a very conservative student in my class who was lovely young man who liked to go on great lyrical homages to capitalism and how great Winston Churchill was. But at one point in class, he started in the immigration unit. He started on a little thing about people who are here illegally. And I said, okay. I said, so what exactly are you asking for? He said, well, people should obey the law. I said, okay, that seems fairly uncontroversial to me. But what about the application of the law? What do you think? How do you think that should work? And he said, well, it should be fair, right? Everybody should be subject to the same, penalty or the same process. And I said, yeah, I agree. And it was a moment, it took a beat. See, we say beat in my world. You got me, Michael? You're up there for me? Thank you. So we took a beat, and I just saw the light bulb go on, right? Where he was suddenly like, oh, it's not being done fairly, right? It's not being done the way he thought it was being done, right? Because immigration this spring was very much in the news. And then at the end of the semester, he asked me to be the second reader on his senior honors thesis. This was a junior seminar. And he said it was because he'd never met such a liberal professor who taught him so much and challenged him in ways that he really enjoyed and looked forward to. So I think by the way we teach, we're also modeling a certain worldview to students. Years ago, I had a student who came from an intensely conservative and both politically and religiously conservative Texas town. And at the end of the semester, he came up to me and he said, Dr. Canning, I've never seen people disagree with each other so nicely. It's like, you were always so nice about it, and you were never mean to anybody. And he had no model in his life for how to have a disagreement that wasn't based on ad hominem attacks or insults or whatever. There was nothing in his life that showed him there's a lot of ways to disagree with someone and come out, not necessarily friends, but at least colleagues. So I've also thought a lot about daily practices as a way of telling stories, that I can't exactly write publicly about, say, listening to people or using data and evidence and then not do so in my practice of teaching. And I think that's really, really key, is to also be scrutinizing each one of our daily practices to ensure that the ideals we're promoting elsewhere are ones we're inhabiting and modeling for those of us in here who are teachers, modeling for our students, right? You can't teach something truthfully that you're not living and that you're not doing. And I believe in it as a practice. So I do believe that, even if maybe the only people I'm reliably reaching are my students, I am trying to be the person in the classroom that I am publicly. And I always say yes, for example, when they want me to meet their families or whatever, or if they invite me to their fraternity sorority has a thing, I always say yes. I mean, if it's possible, because I feel like any place I could show up where they don't expect someone like me to show up is a good thing. I mean, so I think because I am coming from theater, that the theater I worked in most of my life was very small grassroots theater. I believe so much in the grassroots. And so I believe that if all of us are doing these incremental small practices wherever we are, we may be doing them at a very high level, that's to the good. I mean, that's very much where I live.
Great. Thank you, Charlotte. Before I open it up for question and answer, I wanted to give Alex and David an opportunity to chime in as well.
Yeah, I think I like your phrase, reliably reaching students. That is what we do in the classroom, and I think the problem that we have to combat semester after semester, year after year, is the fact that the dissemination of what is just and true is being outpaced by what is unjust and untrue. And so that creates a lot of work for me in the classroom. I feel like I'm always reinventing the wheel. When I teach Shakespeare, for instance, students will come in, I'll have like Romeo and Juliet on the syllabus, and they often will say, it's a love story. And sure, exactly. That's where I'm going with this.
Sorry.
Yes, you mentioned Taylor Swift. I think my mic went out. It was yours. Yes, Taylor Swift. This one's not working either.
They're working.
Okay. I taught a pop culture Shakespeare course this term, first time because my institution wanted me to teach something fun and interesting, and I ended up including music. And so Taylor Swift's Willow Song, Fate of Ophelia, and Love Story worked their way into the syllabus. And what was so fascinating to me, talking about empowering students and giving them the tools, we read the plays, and so we learned the plays, then we played with the learning. And they came to these really interesting conclusions about these songs. We looked at the music videos, and each song, they were like, did she actually read the play? Because, it's, again, contributing to the misinformation and the disinformation that's spreading. And I get it's pop culture, it's pop music, all of that. But at the same time, we have to be accountable for the things that we are transmitting to people all the time, because it matters. And so, one of those songs has like over 1 billion streams. I'm not going to reach 1 billion students, but I would like to. So if somebody wants to help with that, we really need that in this world.
I was thinking back to Michael's question about like who is our public, and certainly for me, a lot of times it's students. And in the classroom, I have a certain amount of control over the conditions under which the students are engaging in material. Right? I try to give agency there, but we're in a room. The same people kind of show up. We have a semester to build relationships and trust. What does that look like outside of the classroom? Well, it kind of depends. What are the spaces that I'm regularly operating in my daily life? Because I do think of my communities as also being the public. And I show up there as a person and as a scholar in the same way that I show up for my students. So I'm not always launching into discussions about my research in music and disability studies because not everybody wants that, and that's cool. But there have been so many opportunities for me to engage with folks in conversations, asking questions out of curiosity, right? And generating these conversations where we can sort of exchange ideas. Sometimes that also becomes, ooh, I do have something to share in my area of expertise of someone is struggling with their child's IEP and they need an advocate, or they're not sure what to do here. Well, because of the relationships that I've built in the community with educators and therapists and different experts, I can connect them in that way. And so anytime I can sort of use my the skills that I've built and my background to help and support the people in my community, I try to take those opportunities, because then we're building relationships and we're building these support systems. And so that's always one of my goals in terms of thinking about who is my public. It's everybody. I'm also the public.
I mean, maybe just to put a fine point on something I shared before, I could have shared it slightly differently, which is to say, when we were first publishing the Life Worth Living book, it came to us, it was an opportunity, we pitched the book to Penguin. Penguin got excited about it, but they wanted to publish it on like a self-help imprint. And there's a part of me as a intellectual, and I thought, I don't want to be on a self-help, like, the only thing I want to write on a self-help imprint is like a takedown of self-help. Like I was too cool for school. And thank goodness I had two co-authors, one of whom has been publishing a lot longer. And he said, this could help this book like reach a really different kind of, like a much larger sort of audience. And so I think it was a little bit, I mean, at the end of the day, so okay, fine, we'll go on the self-help group at Penguin. And then Maria Shriver starts up her imprint within the self-help group, and she's like, "Oh, let's do this book." And then the book's on the Today Show, and then it's a New York Times bestseller. But and actually, at the end of the day, like I said, like we ended up writing the book slightly differently. I think with like the discipline actually of having to write in the self-help imprint actually helped me think like more creatively about how to translate my relationship to my students to a relationship with a potential audience, and to sort of invite people, like I said, to sort of almost like, well, we had a seminar, like you go set up a seminar, and this book might help you do that. Anyway, so there's a little bit of that, like, can I can I write a self-help book? But we did, and I think it actually has redounded to the sort of dissemination in the university terms of I think of not some knowledge, but I think of practices of curiosity and patience and whatnot in the classroom. Yeah.
Thanks. I will open it up to question and answer. I see one hand enthusiastically just shot up, but I will also give you a little bit of time should you want to think of a question yourself. And during that thinking time, I'll also note that for the schedule, we just threw the schedule out of the window, and we'll finish off after questions on that last topic that we had thought about in brainstorming of forward thinking. What is something that we're inspired by, that we're looking into and incorporating in our own ways as humanities scholars? So I'll give that prep time to the panel as well. Questions? I saw one in the back as well. Would you just like to start us off?
Good morning, everyone. Number one, I'd like to apologize for the interruption coming in. My apologies. Question for you. I am a recently retired teacher. Thank you for your service. Part of why I was able to retire was because, number one, of age, because number two, quite honestly, I became very disillusioned as to what we are teaching or not teaching our children. I'm not speaking about math and English and science. I'm not saying that. I'm saying as far as sociology, I'm saying as far as history, those have all been miseducated, if I can use that word. Now they're talking about totally expunging it. Where do you see your role into counteracting that?
Oh my God, this is one of my soapboxes. Yes. Thank you so much. So I recommend that everybody watch a documentary. It won the Oscar, Mr. Nobody Against Putin, or Putin Against Mr. Whatever. You know what I'm talking about. And if you don't, just Google it. It's there. So it's just very quickly, it's a documentary based on sort of surreptitious footage that a young man in a school in Russia shot as the Russian government, Putin, ramped up sort of ideological indoctrination in the schools. There's this great moment in the teacher's lounge about 2/3 of the way through the movie where the teachers they're grading. And they say, the students are doing much worse. They say, they're just not learning. They're not, this work is much worse than it used to be. When I saw that, it hit me like a ton of bricks. And I flashed back to a conversation I'd had with the president of UT months before, where I said to him, the data and research demonstrates that the best way to ensure lack of quality and to damage student learning is to allow partisan politics to encroach on education. I don't care which party, which politics. The minute education is held hostage to partisan politics, it is degraded. And the evidence shows this very clearly all around the globe. It's not just the US, not just Russia. So I would say, first of all, I'm so sorry that happened to you, because again, in this movie, you see these dedicated teachers heartbroken that the thing they've dedicated their lives to is being thrown out the window to serve this specific political agenda and personal sense of power. But I hope maybe you would write an op-ed or some public thing about your experience. In fact, I'd be glad to help you. I'll give you my card afterwards. Because I think we need to hear those stories of the damage this is doing, but that it's not, the damage isn't solely because of the specific content. The damage is because partisan politics does not belong in education, period. And in fact, you know what the best educational system in the US is? Best public educational system? Anyone have a guess? No? Okay. No, I don't do that in the classroom. We don't have time for me to do the long pause, encouraging your participation. I'm a better teacher than this. But I'm going to tell you, it's the military. You know why? Because they are their own unit, self-contained, and they can go on what data and research tells you are the best ways to teach the information students need and the knowledge they need to acquire and the skills they need to develop. The military. So think about that for a minute. So thank you so much for coming today and sharing that story, and we're going to get your voice out there. Because it's like Yale, there's like, somebody's going to, yeah. We'll get you hooked up.
Can I chime in real quick? Yeah, I 100% agree that partisan politics have no place in education. And where am I? I'm at the State House. In the past 2 years, I have been at the State House. I'm privileged to live in Columbia, South Carolina, which is the state capital of South Carolina. I'm at the State House. I'm writing my representatives. I'm connecting with a lot of educators, a lot of nonprofit organizations that are dedicated to this work. And I think that is our role. And my colleagues are there too. So I don't see this division between higher education and K through 12. Education is education, and all educators and all students need support.
No, I agree with that. And I would add, the approach to your question, it's got to be multi-pronged. And so something that I do thinking about, K through 12 and also higher ed is getting in front of middle school students and high school students when I get invited to be in those spaces by teachers, because I have a level of expertise that I can translate, to use that word that Francis used, into helping them understand whether it's, the Shakespeare and race conversation. That's something that happens. I would love to see the day when I get first-year students who are not surprised that we can talk about Shakespeare and race, because all bodies are raced bodies. The other thing I would say, too, is I've done work with, I think it's Humanities, Texas, in the Folger Shakespeare Library in the D.C. public school system, again, trying to get involved with students at that level, because the sooner you get them, the better it is for their understanding later about how things really do work in terms of that conversation we're having about truth, for instance.
The other benefit of these engagements for me is that as a higher education instructor, I was never taught how to teach, but K-12 instructors were. And so I collaborate with middle school and high school teachers in part so that I can learn how to teach from the real experts.
We had one more question. Yeah. And then we'll go to Francis. Michael and then Francis.
So her edges are laid, y'all. Learning has changed so much. It's a lot of people to a lot of people now. And so I'm so curious from you all, what techniques have you used to adjust to that learning, and where might you have had successes, especially in the arts and humanities that can be really entrenched in old, dated practices?
I go first all the time.
No, you should go. So, one actually very old thing that I'm finding helpful again, I ran sort of like Oxbridge style tutorials last year for a lot of my, so the model is just, it's basically like oral examination around student work. I don't think about it as examination because I'm more interested in conversation. But in any case, that's a little bit like nudged by some of these like AI panics about what do we are students actually writing any of their papers anymore? But that's been a sort of like the old is new again. Invite them, write a paper, submit it, share it with 3 or 4 colleagues. We come in, we all have a conversation together, and there's that sort of. And the first question that I always put in is, what was at stake for you personally in writing this paper? So we're just immediately, and I tell them that will be the question. Anyway, so I feel like in certain ways, I don't mean it mostly as like a sort of AI policing thing, but it's helped me sort of go through the process of like, wait, why do I assign writing assignments? And I think I assign writing in order to incentivize students to do thinking and careful thinking of the sort that writing sort of encourages them to do. me reading and them lobbing the paper over the wall and me lobbing comments back over the wall isn't the only way to sort of deal with that artifact or engage that artifact. And actually, these sort of tutorial. So in the fall, I'll be for the first time having my teaching fellows engage in tutorials in a larger class, and I'm excited. I'm working actually with a graduate student to sort of design that role, and I think that'll actually be a really engaging sort of mode. So that's a small little practice that I'm excited about these days.
So we'll go David and then Francis.
I would say, something I'm pushing myself to do is not resisting reality and trying to work with the systems and figure out ways to work with the systems that I have to work against. And so essentially using the negative to my advantage in that respect. And I go back to my pop culture Shakespeare class example. I had my students engage a lot with Instagram, for instance, which I was only doing because I knew that would be of interest to them. But it became of interest to me because I saw how they were taking ownership of the resources that they were bringing into the classroom, really using their critical thinking skills to think about, what's good, what's not, what's accurate, what's not. And that led them to become, interested in the idea of even just research. So really whatever we can do to make, I think, the learning process more engaging and fun, but also not losing that critical thinking component is super important.
About money. So my office sits at a different part of the university than most arts and humanities centers sit at. It's the tech transfer office, and I very intentionally was kind of gravitated to that part of the university because it's a powerfully resourced part of the university. It builds hospital systems. It licenses patentable IP that can be licensed to companies. It's a huge generator of profit for the it's a huge generator of revenue for the university, and because of that, it gets prioritized significantly over a lot of the work that the people in this room do. And so I wonder, and it's not a center that only interacts with philanthropic dollars or endowment dollars or even public dollars. It interacts with private capital. That's something that we don't have access to and we don't really engage with in the arts and humanities. But I've seen it be a very effective tool to getting ideas out into the world that do a lot of times jump over the culture that we're trying to create for ourselves. So I just wondered if y'all had any ideas or thoughts about capital. Do you like the way that capital is used in, the systems that you're in? Do you think that we should be leaning further into like the models that we currently have, or would you like to see us explore? I'm very biased about this, but I would really like to hear what y'all have to say.
So in Texas, they have a saying, you got to dance with them that brung you. So I'm willing to dance, although I'm a theater scholar, not a dance scholar. Although I don't think I'm particularly adept at generating those ideas, when other people do, I'm open to them because it's all part of having conversations outside my community, right? So I don't know. I'll sit down with, a venture capitalist. I don't, whatever. It'll be an interesting conversation. But if I can, it also feeds into we're asked to do an idea. So when I first arrived at the University of Texas in the 90s, there was this huge research project in political science and social science that was about if voters have access to unbiased information and can talk about it, will it move how they think and vote? And so they got a lot of funding to bring in people from all over the country, from all sorts of walks of life, and they made it possible for each one of them to be there. Like one guy said, who was literally a dairy farmer, said, I can't come because who's going to milk my cows? So the folks organizing it hired someone to milk the cows and paid for that so he could attend. And they had a few-day summit of talking about the big key issues of the 90s and giving people, data and information that, they could demonstrate it was sourced. This was not, the story was as factual as possible. And it moved people way to the left because they were suddenly like, wait a second, what? This particular group isn't the source of my woes? Or in Texas, Republicans have been in power for about 30 years, every single statewide office. And yet every year they reliably run on Democrats are killing us. There's not a single Democrat in any position of power here in the United States. So I started thinking about this. I thought, what if there was a massive amount of money to do this all over the country and bring people to centers? It doesn't have to be universities. It could be community centers or churches or whatever, to have and to ask them which issue they'd like to know more about. And I mean, you'd ask them before, and then prepare information for them and ways for them to talk and engage about it. So they could suddenly go, oh. So that's why maybe a single payer healthcare system might actually benefit me. Right? That's why maybe having partisan politics out of education would actually be better for maybe my conservative faith-based child than not. And I would love, that's something I would die to participate in, is huge conversations all over the country where we give people the evidence they need to really think about and explore and have conversations so that there really are these ways that people are contacting one another. I mean, it strikes me as an incredibly democratic project, right? And who knows what could grow out of such encounters, right? That's the places where people dream big and come up with ideas for businesses, arts project, anything. Right? How to run their city government better. Why UBI, Universal Basic Income, might actually be the answer to our problems. So that's sort of where I dream. And I don't know that we can dream that in just one sector of the economy or one sector of the community. It's something that those of us who really do believe very strongly in a kind of evidence, going where the evidence takes us, going with kindness and compassion and generosity, that's the kind of encounter. And I think if we do that, that's where change comes from.
In the ways that you might be able to address both Francis's question and offer final thoughts, a minute left to the remaining panelists. If not, that's okay. I'm sure Francis will come up to you at the end and ask her question again.
Okay. I'm kind of in two different spaces. So we'll talk about that later. Is that okay? Okay. All right. Well, one of the things that we wanted to address was this idea of transformational learning communities. Like, what does that mean? Oh, it sounds good. And as I started to really look into the definition, I always like to start with the definition, I'm seeing that this is already happening, right? There are things that we can dream, there are things that we can do differently. But even in my own community, my church saw that there was a lot of division around ideology. And so we decided we were going to do speed dating, an ideological speed dating thing. And we were going to have different topics and pair people to have a conversation about someone who was maybe pro-firearms and someone who was, not so much. And to start with the personal story of why they feel that way. And you're connecting with someone that you'll probably see every week, right? So you're getting that human connection. Another thing that they've done is a skill swap. So people say what they would like to learn about, and then you pull it out of a hat and you say, oh, I have this skill, I can teach you, right? And that's not necessarily, me, university professor, I have stuff to teach you, come sit down, I'm going to tell you all my knowledge. This is something that is very much happening in community. Someone can help you with your taxes, someone can teach you how to knit, I don't know. But thinking about shifting the idea of who are learners and who are knowers, right? We're all learners, and maybe it's more important to be a learner than it is to be a knower. And I think that is the genesis of a transformational learning community.
I'm going to kind of tie this into Francis' question about money. I think money is super important and helpful, particularly because it affords scholars freedom and time. time to think, time to create. And I'm saying that from my experience as receiving the ACLS Mellon Scholars in Society Fellowship. It was a $106,000 award that I got to obviously get me time off from teaching. I was able to join the Racial Imaginary Institute. I was able to create my book. I was able to build a virtual reality art gallery that complemented my book, so that, again, using that as a public resource to provide visuals to help bring people into the work that I do as a Shakespeare and critical race studies scholar. So, money matters. And I think it's obviously a complex conversation that we can have around money too, because there's, links between capitalism and other issues. But at the same time, when I think about what I said regarding the outpacing of truth and justice, we need to be channeling this work into the world.